This is my dog, Bruce. I made him viral. I also do this for entrepreneurs. My job was to try and market Social Chain as an agency. And rather than trying to go after people who were at a similar level or maybe even above, I went right back down to the bottom. It's easy when you've got Steven Bartlett. And can you do it for the construction guy in Leeds that isn't Steven Bartlett? My decision was to not work on my own anymore and try to build great influence past me. So the job for us, keep chipping away until we get the person offline, online.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkifi Podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.
Welcome to the Market Movers Podcast. Today we have Ash Jones, founder of Great Influence, who has shaped the personal brands of industry leaders like Steven Bartlett, my personal favourite dragon, and Gary Neville. Ash, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey Ash, thanks for coming on. All right, so to start, you've worked with some really high-profile personalities. So I think let's begin with the story of how you initially got involved with Steve Bartlett and Social Chain.
Yeah, so I met Steve in 2012 when I was 25 and he was 18 and he'd just dropped out of university. Like in his backstory, he talked about going to university and dropping out after one lecture. I met him after that lecture, not directly after that lecture, but around that time. And I met him at of all places, like a hip hop event outside during a break, and we had a mutual friend, and he said like, oh, Steve's starting this business and I was trying to get into marketing. I was going to study marketing at university, and he said you two should chat. And then I spoke to him on the day and then dropped him a message on Facebook afterwards, and yeah, I met up with him. He told me this idea. I said I'd work for free for him whilst I was at uni, as I had a student loan. I was like, I'm good, I don't need paying. He did pay me, which was good of him in the end, but I worked with him for like a few years on this startup idea that he had, and off the back of that came the like Social Chain, and that started happening, and quite quickly I think that launched in like September or October 2014, and then by February or March 2015, like 4 or 5 months later, it just kind of went like. And my role essentially was like marketing for the agency. So trying to get the name of Social Chain out there as an agency amongst, whether it was brands in terms of leads or just amongst like the agency scene and other people within it in the industry, because nobody knew who we were. Like I was 25 and my job before that was I was unemployed for years before that. Steve was 18. This was like the first proper thing that he was doing. Dom, the co-founder, it was the first thing that he was doing. It was basically just a bunch of kids trying something, so nobody knew who we were. So that was my job, was to try and market Social Chain as an agency. And we quite quickly realized within a few months that the best way to do that was via Steve, as he was going out and doing like very small speaking things, like anywhere that would have him. Like I remember going to this like a loft in Shoreditch, and there was like 12 people there, and it was like social media, and he spoke at that, and that was like one of the early things, and he kept repeating that, and it went so well for us in terms of him being on stage, drove so much potential opportunity for Social Chain. We sat down and it was like, rather than trying to get people to care about this agency Social Chain that nobody's heard of and do boring things, why don't we just do something with Steve where it's like, how do we scale the impact of him speaking on stage? And at the time, Gary Vaynerchuk was on episode like 70 something of his Daily V vlog, and I remember looking at that and thinking, no one's doing that in the UK, like that kind of thing. Like creating content online, it sounds so stupid now, but in 2015, that wasn't the case, especially in like business and entrepreneurship. So he started like doing these one-off videos that we film after everyone left the office, like late at night, and we put those out and they did well. And then he started doing a daily vlog, and that's when things really started to take off around Social Chain. And my role there, building his personal brand, it was like from the ground up, and I did that for like 4 years. But the first 2 and a bit years of it was purely like Steven as a funnel for Social Chain. And then he started to build up a like name of his own, and it kind of started to grow above Social Chain. Like Steven Bartlett just started becoming a thing in its own right. So yeah, that's kind of the starting point of it.
Nice. So you did your job well then.
I think, yeah. I mean, I say like do your job well. It's like he was brilliant as he's the same now as he was then. Like, yes, it took him a while to sharpen his sword, but once he got in the pocket with it, he was so good at like being on camera and coming up with ideas and little thoughts and opinions and the storyteller and all these things. It's like the easiest job in the world. Yeah.
Did you finish university? Is my first question. And then was the vlog the natural evolution to his now diary of a CEO podcast?
So I did finish uni, and I was the only person. There was like 20 of us at the start of Social Chain the first year, and a bunch of them were like uni dropouts because of Social Chain. It was like, we were all in on Social Chain, and I somehow managed to wrangle finishing, even though Social Chain was in Manchester and my university was in London. So I didn't go to a lecture in my third year, but they gave me a pass as long as I completed the exams, because they kind of looked at what I was working on and was like, well, he's trying to do marketing, and this is literally a marketing agency that they're building. So yeah, London South Bank Uni were very good with me. And yeah, the blog kind of happened from 2016 to 2017. And then in September 2017 was the first episode of Diary of a CEO, which will not be available now. There was a version of it, maybe it is, I don't know, but it was just Steve with like his iPhone and a little £30 mic that would plug into it, and he would record it. He had this little apartment in, I want to say Ancoats in Manchester, and there was this little like almost like Harry Potter-esque cupboard under his stairs, and it was the only place that you could go where it was like tight sound wise, so it's like a small space. So he'd sit in there and record this, like him just talking for 30 minutes, and that was the start of Diary of a CEO. And I had a very, very, very short-lived career as a podcast editor, and the only podcast on my creds is Diary of a CEO, and I edited the first 2 episodes. Like they were just audio, and the second episode I put it live, and it was just on SoundCloud at the time. Like the first few episodes were just on SoundCloud, and I put it live. And I remember one Sunday evening being in the bath, and then I had a text from Steve being like, "Hey, did you listen to the episode before you uploaded it?" And I was like, "Oh no!" And I listened back to the episode, and about 9 minutes in, it cuts to like off mic stuff, and then it cuts back into the actual episode, and that was the end of my very short-lived career as a podcast editor, and we got a professional in to do it. But it was like, yeah, it was just him for a while, and he had the odd guest, and then I think he took a bit of a break on it, and then it came back in 2020. Like he was on off with it for 2017 to 19 when it was audio only, and then 2020 he brought in a guy called Jack Sylvester, he's like the producer of it now, and he just changed the game of what it was, and they started doing it on YouTube, and it started being the thing that it is now. So yeah, it was an evolution. Like he definitely grew into Diary of a CEO, and it went from just being him to this other thing. And even the podcast itself went on like it's been going for 7 years now, but most people probably think it's only been going for 3 or 4, but it just had iterations that people weren't really familiar with. Yeah.
That's great. You were editor for a few episodes. It's a good resume booster, right?
Yeah. If ever I need a job, I could just I could blag that. Do you know what I mean? Top 10 podcast in the world. Podcast.
Yeah. Make sure you've got your IMDb citation. That's what you want.
Yeah. You don't have to list the episodes you were involved with.
No.
So, at what point did he go on to Dragon's Den? I'm curious what the timeline here, with starting the podcast. And
it was actually. So I'd been doing Great Influence for like 2 years. So after I left, I decided to leave Social Chain in 2018. And I set up a company called Great Influence, which was taking the idea of what I'd been doing with Steve for 4 or 5 years of like helping founders and entrepreneurs build personal brand and create content and social media and things like that. And I was doing that on my own from 2018 to 2020. And around the middle of 2020, I was in a bit of like a where do I go from here? Steve and Dom had left Social Chain, and Dom was kind of like, what does life look like now? And Steve had this call from BBC regarding Dragon's Den potentially. And I remember the 3 of us having a conversation one day, and we were all just kind of like in this space of like, where do we go from here with these things that we've all got? And Dragon's Den was one of them for Steve. And yeah, it kind of started around that time, and yeah, he decided to do it. And I think the first episode, maybe it aired 2021, I want to say something like that. And it was just like, I remember being in like 2010 binge watching the life out of Dragon's Den, like however many seasons there were at the time. I watched them all, watched every episode, and there was a period where I was just obsessed with it. And then yeah, like I think a lot of people now in business and things like that, at some point had that little stint of watching Dragon's Den religiously. And then I remember sitting there in my apartment watching the first episode that he was on and just being like,
surreal.
This is why.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. Like, even now, like I was in London the other day and I was in Leicester Square, and you know, they have like the digital billboards around Leicester Square, like massive billboards. And I was walking past and a Samsung advert was on, and then he was on the Samsung advert, and I was like, so strange at times.
Yeah. That's crazy. Okay, so 2018, you decided to leave Social Change and you started Great Influence. I'm interested, what was your client acquisition strategy like in those early days? I know Steve Bartlett is a client now, as well as, you know, footballer, the founder of Huel. So you're doing pretty well. I'd like to know the evolution of that and what those early days look like.
My client acquisition is actually stood next to me licking his lips. So this little guy was my client acquisition. This is my pug Bruce.
First dog we've had on the show, so that's good.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but when I started Great Influence, I had Steve as like a case study. Like, this is the person that I worked with. This is what we kind of did together. And rather than trying to go after people who were at a similar level or maybe even above, like shooting your shot, I went right back down to the bottom. And the first person that I worked with was a guy who ran a little construction company in Leeds. And I just kind of like learned my chops of personal brand, because my concern was that it's easy when you've got Steven Bartlett, and can you do it for the construction guy in Leeds that isn't Steven Bartlett? And I just went and did it with a few people who the very small business owners. And then my client acquisition strategy, I sent that dog. So there was a video of him in 2017 that went viral on the internet. It did like 200 million views or something daft like that. So he'd gone viral, and I didn't know how to do outbound DM. Like, what do I say? And I just sent 100 DMs on LinkedIn. I found 100 founders of companies in like London and Manchester, and I sent them a message that said, it was a picture of Bruce, and it said, "This is my dog Bruce. I made him viral. If you're wondering how I did this, I also do this for entrepreneurs. So yeah, if you're curious about the story, drop me a message." And then 3 people got replies, and one of them ended up being a client, and that client was the one where I figured out.
Yeah, nice.
So yeah, it's thanks to the dog.
Yeah,
really.
That's a great story.
What is it like then starting over? So you've got Steve Bartlett, who's a big name. You take on the construction guy. How did it go building up a personal brand for something so different?
I wouldn't do it now. Like, now we're about to launch a new service, and fortunately we've had a client for it, and that client is legitimately a top 100 company in the world. So it's like the same situation I was in 6 years ago, where I had like a top 100 entrepreneur kind of thing. But this time around with this new business, I'm leveraging the case study to open doors rather than going back down to the bottom of the ladder. But it was really useful because I needed to figure out how to do it in a non-pressured, not that it wasn't pressured, but non-pressured environment, to get things wrong and figure it out in different ways. And it was really useful. And I spent maybe 18 months working on a number of very small business owners. And then I got intro to a guy called Jamal, who's on the board at Huel. And Jamal said, "I think that Julian Hearn from Huel, who's the founder, would be interested in having a conversation with you." And that was like the first time that any door had opened that was of some kind of ilk. Like, Huel at the time were flying, and I was actually like, there's a picture of me in 2016 with Steve wearing a Huel t-shirt, and I brought Huel to the Social Chain office, and I got the whole Social Chain office hooked on Huel. I was like the early adopter of Huel. And even like Steve is now like on the board at Huel, I gave him Huel. And it was like this really nice thing for me of like, oh, I've genuinely been a user of his product from like 3 years ago, when it near enough first started. I think Huel started 2015. So to go meet Julian was like, this is perfect. You're somebody who I just feel you could do so much, and I genuinely am interested in the brand, like I'm a user of the product. So we had a conversation and started working together, and that was the first time that I started working on somebody who was a bit of a name. And it started to just grow from there. And then I hired someone in 2020, around that time when me, Steve, and Don were having those conversations about where do we go from here. My decision was to not work on my own anymore and try to build Great Influence past me, like really try and take it somewhere and see what we could do with it. And I hired I met a girl called Claudia Cardinali, who's our strategy director now. We started working together, and one like credible client after the other started to come through, where like the founder of Grenade, founder of Huel Julian, My Protein, Pretty Little Thing. Yeah, a bunch of them all started coming through around like 2020. So I had like 2 years of getting ready for that moment, which is quite like I needed those 2 years to figure it all out. If I'd have gone from Steve to like the founder of Grenade and Huel, who were like rocket ships at the time, I wouldn't have been afforded a bit of time to figure out what I needed to figure out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. So it gave you that time to prepare yourself for what's come. I'm interested then in the nuts and bolts of personal branding. What is the strategy with a new client? Where do you start to look? What does the course of that journey look like? Where do you as the person working with that client, where do you want to take them? Where do they feel like they want to be taken? Yeah, if you could talk about all of that.
I think for me, there's a real difference between personal brand and social media, and the two are very like crossover at the minute, where people kind of think like, right, okay, I'm just like post on social media and that's me ticking the box of building personal brand. Whereas to me, it's like, it has nothing to do with social media. It's all about like, how do you position yourself? How do you want to come across? What's the perception that you want to like generate in people when they think of you? Like, yeah, it's all like what messaging, what narratives are you trying to own? How are you trying to stand out amongst the crowd? Like, it's all those things for me with personal brand. And it's very like even last night, I was speaking to someone that I've known for a long time that's like high profile, and we don't work together, but I just kind of like every now and then I have thoughts. And I was saying about like, one thing that I think they need to do more of is like a bit more personable, because they're doing everything, but it's like, you know, just something raw, like pick up the phone and you know, something a bit more personable than producing everything. And it's like, even though you're talking about like social media and content and how they show up online, it's not about the online piece or the piece of content or the picking up the phone. It's like, you're doing it because it's making you come across in a human way and in a personable way. And I think given what's going on right now, there's a bit of a gap there for you to lean into and leverage that. And yeah, personal brand to me is all those things. It's like, how do you position yourself and come across in a certain way to people, and like storytell around what you need to be speaking about, and try to carve out a bit of a name and niche for yourself and a bit of point of differentiation from what other people are doing. That to me is personal brand, and kind of what we talk about with clients initially. It's like, right, we need to figure out who you are and what you're trying to achieve and where you're trying to go with this. And then once we've done all that, then we start looking at like, right, how does that translate online? Like, how do you take the essence of what we've just figured out and try and like distribute that into what does content look like? How do you show up in the world in terms of content and social media? And it's then bringing those two worlds together. Like, you really need to understand all those like personal brand elements to lay the foundation. And then you really need to understand social media to be able to get people to listen, because you can nail the personal brand, but if then the content is awful, no one's going to engage with it. So yeah, that's kind of like I think personal brand, people have a bunch of different approaches of how to do it or what it means to them. That is certainly mine, where it's like, start with all the things around reputation and how you build influence, how you make a name in the industry, and then chuck on like the social media bit on top. Like, how do you then make great content and build an audience on social and play to the rules of the platforms that you're going on and things like that?
Yeah, so I want to ask about how you come up with that initial strategy. So we saw you in Ibiza a couple weeks ago on a panel talking about strategy, and there were three of you up there, and you guys all had sort of different takes on it. One person was saying you should be really personable, which I think fit what she was, you know, her business very well. Another person was like just really out there, and you were the most strategic. I think that's probably because you were working with, you know, a bunch of different clients, and so that's part of the role, is being very strategic. So one thing I think that's confusing for people, or hard for people to wrap their minds around. So when you look at the people who are doing really well, they are names. They're CEOs of big companies. It just feels easier for them to have like good content to create. They're kind of talking about running their business. They have a lot of stories. It feels very obvious the things they're talking about. And you to have someone who's maybe starting out, they're trying to build a business, you know, they're at the lower end. They don't have all those stories. They're sharing more like case studies. They're coming across a lot more salesy. How do the people who are just starting out, how do they develop that strategy and figure out, you know, what kind of content to create and how to put themselves out there?
I think it's really interesting, the comparison you make between the three of us that were on the panel. And two of them have built their own, like Leah and Lewis. It's like, I think Leah's definitely, hers is a bit more broader. She worked with a lot of people on training them, but I think it both comes from like, how have I built my personal brand, and that becomes my ethos. Whereas I don't, like, that's not, I had to, it's like we have 10, 12 clients right now, and each one of them is wildly different. So it's, for me, the way that I think about it is more like, you really have to understand the individual and its personality. Like, how can you take their personality and represent it and translate it online? And I think of a couple of people that we're working with now, the most, I don't know, how do I put it? Like, the best compliment that you could give me is like, that is them. That's the offline version of them. You've translated that so perfectly well in terms of how they come across. And it's in little things, like Claudia in our team the other day has just started doing video content, and she's been on and off with it for a while, not quite figured it out. And I watched the edits back, and I was like, you're in the pocket. That is you. Like, the little quirks that you do, that you're saying, like, you've all of a sudden figured out how to show up as yourself on video. Like, that's the Claudia that I actually know. And it's not easy to just take that and put it on video, because the camera goes on and all of a sudden you start sounding a bit different, and you're sitting up straight a bit more, and like all these things. And it takes a lot of time to like undo the natural response to creating content, to actually bring and infuse the real personality into it. And the people that I think do it best are the people that have been doing it for like 10, 15, 20 years. Like, they're so used to being on camera that they've got over the idea of being on camera or creating content or wherever it is. And then their personality is really able to actually come out and come through. And I think that's when you get like, that's the magic of it for me, is the 10 people that we work with at Great Influence. The job for us is literally like, keep chipping away at it until we get the person offline, online. And it doesn't happen at first. It takes time. And really understanding what that personality is. And with some people, it's so clear and evident when you sit down with them on day one. With some people, they need some coaching, and you need to draw it out of them, and you have to figure out what their personality is in a sense. You can see elements of it, but there's so far to go. I remember one of the early clients that I had, when I first sat down with him, he was like, just a heads up, I'm never going to film a video and I'm never taking a photo. And it kind of spoke to like the barrier that he'd put up. And he had such a great personality. And my job was like, okay, your very barriers up, and my job is to barrier down so that your actual personality and how you are offline, which is brilliant, is going to come through. And like, fast forward, what, 4 years now, he's got like 2 million followers across social, and he produces video every single day. And he's now, you see his content, and he's now just starting to get in the pocket of where his personality actually is. And it's taken 4 or 5 years of him producing content and going on that journey. So I think that, to me, is like, that's the trick of it, is bringing the actual you online. And how you get started, essentially, is like, that doesn't happen overnight. Like, take that guy who's like, I'm not doing all the things that I do, that he does today. He wasn't doing any of them. He wasn't willing to. And I think for me, it's about finding like, what pocket are you comfortable in? And for some people, that might just be literally, like, say you're in the marketing industry, it might just be commenting on marketing campaigns that happen, which is, you're not putting yourself into it, you're just writing a bit of something. And you might not even be writing a bit of an opinion. You might literally just be like sharing what you've seen. So it's like, you're just a bit of like a resource for, you know, something in that industry. I think there's a number of different ways that people can start it. Like, there's a million, right? You can pick up a camera and start filming thought leadership. You can pick up a camera and start talking about what you're doing with your day. You can storytell. You can not pick up a camera. You can write. You can talk about the industry. You can do so many things. But the most important thing is that it's comfortable to you. And it's like figuring out, what am I deeply comfortable with, that the minute I press post, regardless of what happens next, I'm fine with the outcome. Finding that is the most important part of your starting at very much zero, because you'll have like the natural wave of motivation of like the first 3-4 weeks of posting. But if you're not comfortable with it, it's gonna, like, the habit's gonna very quickly fall off. And you're not going to give yourself the chance to get to 4 or 5 years like that guy has now that I've just spoke on, where now, after producing thousands of pieces of content for 4 or 5 years, his personality is now coming through, and he's really getting in the pocket. So it's just, for me, the first year is about, do it in the most comfortable way possible. That means that you keep coming back, because I think a lot of people go to do it, and then they do it in a way that's not really comfortable with them, and then they press post, and all of a sudden the outcome isn't what they expected. And because it wasn't comfortable to do, the outcome drives like whether it was successful or not, because they're a bit insecure about doing it, or a bit uncomfortable, or a bit unsure about what they've said. And therefore, if it goes really well, validation. If it doesn't go really well, it pushes them back. Whereas if you're super comfortable with what you've done and you're like, yeah, I actually think this is an interesting thing, or it's what I want to post and I'm completely happy with it, I think if it doesn't go well, you're less bothered and you show up again the next day regardless. And those early pieces of evidence that you collect, like anything you start for the first time, your first experiences and exposures to what the outside world thinks are so crucial in forming how you approach it. So yeah, I think for me, if you're starting out, it's like there's a number of different things that you can do, but it's a bit of a journey of figuring out for yourself which is the most comfortable, which one doesn't like makes you least sick to the stomach, because everyone gets that like icky feeling and like, oh God, what if someone comments something bad or whatever it is. And it's just finding the thing that makes that feeling the smallest it could be and focusing on that for no pressure. I think I posted about it yesterday. Like there's such a pressure now on not even just founders to show up in companies. There's now a pressure on like leadership teams. I was with an agency the other day, like a global agency. They've got a leadership team of 150, 5,000 employees. And the majority of the leadership team now, the person I was speaking to said that they feel like they have to be Steven Bartlett, because there's a pressure and expectation if you're in a senior role within a global company now to be creating content online and putting yourself out there. And they feel it, and it's a pressure now. So it's like, don't focus on trying to be something and the pressure of it and all those kind of things. You can do a perfectly good job by doing one thing a week or one thing a month for 6 months. And it's just getting over that first year hurdle of creating the habit and becoming comfortable with it. And then naturally you will find yourself, like anyone who does this is by default ambitious and career driven in some way, shape or form. Like the people, none of us would be posting on social media if we weren't like career driven and ambitious, because I think the majority of us probably aren't the type of person people to naturally do it. There are some, but the majority of us are doing it for a reason and because we're ambitious and driven and we want to create opportunity and put ourselves out there. And yeah, I think if you're that kind of person, which the majority of people are doing this kind of thing, you will naturally start to be more ambitious with it and start to, like, it's a bit cheesy, but spread your wings with it, so to speak, after you've got that first year of doing the really comfortable, straightforward, achievable, easy thing under your belt.
That's awesome. You mentioned Lee. I just wanted to tell our listeners, Lee Turner on LinkedIn, she was great on the talk. I think one of her sort of the messaging that she was given was that she's very open on social. She shares a lot of private information. So I'm intrigued, especially with what Nick was discussing in terms of starting out. So if we don't have access to a wonderful agency such as yours to do the job for us, and we want to start thinking about our own personal brand and taking that first step into producing content that reflects our personality, do we have to be strategic in our thinking before we start posting? You said to be comfortable with what you post, but will certain types of content do better? Is it better to be as open as possible with photos of the family, things that you're doing, but with what you're comfortable with? Or do certain types of content resonate better? Is it on a individual by individual basis? And then finally, what happens if you've got a bad personality? Like, those people are out there. How does one give a version of themselves which they know is going to do well out there in the wider world?
And you're talking about LinkedIn specifically, right? Because I think that's where everyone is like, should you post personal stuff? Should you not?
Yeah.
Facebook is completely different, but LinkedIn, should you post that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it depends on what outcome you're trying to create. And I think I said this in Ibiza on the panel about, like, if you're an agency owner and you're just looking to get like 2 clients a year and that's the only thing that you truly care about, then yeah, you could talk about the personal element of it. And there's an argument for, like, okay, you're trying to create relationships with people with the aim of creating business opportunity further down the line. And relationships are built by like personal connection at times. Like, that's a part of the mix of things that you can do to create a personal relationship with someone. But it's like, what's the number one thing that's going to get you closer to that? And if you're literally just like, I need 2-3 clients this year, the number one thing that's going to get you closer to that is talking about the work that you do and the value that you add in the problem that you solve and the challenges that you help overcome for people. So it's like, just focus on that. Like, you don't have to do again, it's like, what opportunity are you trying to generate? And there might be multiple. Yes, one part of it might be securing sales, customers, clients, whatever it is. But another part of it might be like, take me, for example, I'm really bad at networking. the Ibiza conference, I spoke to no one. Like, unless they came up to me like, oh, so we talk. It's like, I can't say hello. So for me, like, the online piece does this amazing job of like, when I go to a conference or an event, now there's somebody who goes, oh, I've seen you on LinkedIn. And it saves me the job of like, that I can't do. Yeah, exactly. So like networking for me is like a part of it. And it's like, I can open doors that I would never open otherwise. So yeah, I think that is what are you trying to get out of it? And then figuring out, right, what's the one thing that you need to do to make that happen? And then the other question was, what was it?
Bad personality.
Yeah. So I get what you mean. I think everyone can learn to be a good personality. And I say this because I was a bad personality. And I think now I'm like capable of doing things that I wasn't capable of doing a decade ago. And I got thrust into it really. Like Steve had a speaking thing and he couldn't make it for one reason or another, and he was like, do you want to do it? And I was no way near capable of, I'd never done anything, and it was at a university, and I went and spoke in like a lecture theatre about social chain. And then after that, it's just reps, like you putting yourself out there and doing it, and you naturally start to sharpen the sword. And me and Claudia in my team as well, like we both would say that we were bad personalities. And through just keep putting ourselves out there and doing it and trying and hating what we've done and looking back and going, oh, that's awful. Like you just start to get better at it and more comfortable. And I think everyone has a bit of a style of them. Like you see it, like we can all, it's just conversation, right? I think that the art of it is getting it to the point where it's just like you're having a conversation with them around the table where there's nothing else going on. And I think of like, I went for food with two of my friends the other day, and it's like, if they could take that version of them two and put it online, that's the art of it. Like we had a great conversation around the table. They're funny. They've got their own personality quirks. And yeah, but if you ask them to turn up online, they'd be awful. Day one, like terrible. So it's kind of like,
why is that then? What is that block then that prevents that easy transition of a genuine personality to be 100% reflected online? What mistakes are we making? Why are we not achieving that goal?
I don't think it's mistakes. I think it's just like part of the art of it is just being able to like think on your feet. And I don't think you can think on your feet in terms of speaking without having done it so many times that you've got like ammo in your back pocket. And I think that part of the value of the work that we do that we don't speak about enough, and is kind of a bit of a knock-on effect, is that we don't have anything to do with the client going and doing public speaking. But I know for a fact that when they go and do public speaking, we're helping them tenfold, because there'll come a point in a conversation or a question or something that they're trying to say, and they'll go, I've done a piece of content on this and I know what the point is of where I'm trying to go. And it's kind of like the art of winging it. And you can get to a point where you can turn up to anything, whether it's like, right, I need to write something, or I'm going to film something, or I'm speaking somewhere, or there's a podcast, or whatever it is. And you don't need to prepare, because it's all in here, because you've got so many points and opinions and things like that. And I think it's like going through the journey of figuring out, like you get the question, and for the first time you don't really know what to say, and then you've heard it 10 times after that and you kind of know where you need to go.
Ash, would this be a good analogy? It's like a manifesto that you've memorized. So it's everything that you think and feel written down, and you're able to just to tap into the exact way you want to portray answers and questions and engagements with people, but in a way that's honed and felt, as opposed to reacting to something and not getting it right because you've got scared or whatnot.
Yeah, essentially. And then I think the other side of it is like just more the learning how to behave. Like you see some people, and it's like you can tell they're early in the journey of putting themselves out there, because they're a bit like fire gun, like a firecracker off everywhere, and it's like just calm down a little. And yeah, it's part of it is that, like learning, taking a breather, when to pause, when to, like, all those things.
That's quite interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that as a benefit, but you're right. There's a lot of times you hear a question and you just need to think about it for a minute. You don't have an instant answer. So when you get a chance to think through all of those things that are, in your industry, it can help you come up with the answers on the spot. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's not only just like Steve used to say, he said him committing to doing his podcast was the greatest like business personal development journey that he ever went on, because, and I understand it completely now running a business, because if I'm committing to like creating my own stuff for LinkedIn, and like even before I was like, oh, I did a post on this yesterday and the point was da 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 da, and it's kind of like, yes, I'd say that on a podcast, but there's also stuff in meetings with clients and new business pitches and meeting people over lunch and having conversations, and it's like I pull back so much reference material from what I've done over the last few years from content that it makes its way into so many different elements of business, from like meetings with people and, like I say, dinners, lunches and pitches and client conversations, strategy conversations, public speaking, podcasting, creating content. Like it's just this mass like network effect of having, like I say, it's literally like having the ammo in your back pocket, like lined up subconsciously, and it's there when you need it and you can pull it out. And people, I think that if I didn't have that, like I'll turn up to things and people will like compliment, oh, like you really know your stuff about this stuff. It's only because I've got all that ammo in the back. I'd be useless otherwise, because if you put me on the spot with something I've not got ammo in the back pocket on, I'm useless. Like I stumble around, I don't know what to say, and I don't sound great. So that stuff has actually helped me to, I don't know, stand out a lot better in person, in business. Like it's really stood me in really, really good stead. And I deeply understand that thing that Steve was saying now that I'm running my own business and doing it and being out in the world and having to have conversations with people and show up and be on the ball and give the right answer and impress people and things like that. And it's this mass network effect on your entire like business professional life, just from committing to like, what are my thoughts, what are my opinions, what stories do I need to tell, all these things, and showing up over a number of years.
You've talked quite a bit about this, like how you represent yourself, coming up with those content ideas. But I'm curious if you have strategies like on the posting side as well. So we hear people, especially on LinkedIn, talk about like really advanced strategies of only connecting with their ideal prospects, messaging people right before they post, networking before and after posting. I'm curious how much attention you pay to that kind of stuff.
I was very salesy.
It does. It does.
Yeah. I'm a bit of like just focus on like making good organic content, and there's no like tips or tricks. I think the one thing that I've seen people do that I actually think is quite smart is like people refer to it like comment strategy. It doesn't need to be called comment strategy. It's just like commenting on people's stuff. Yeah.
Engaging.
And I think like having a list of people that you're trying to like build relationships with and making sure that you're showing up in response to them. And like there was one this morning, a guy called Harry Stebbings, he runs like 20 VC podcast, and he's just raised like this $400 million fund, and it was announced yesterday. And I've just done a post on it today. And I've done a post on him before, and I DM'd him afterwards being like, I just love what you're doing and the journey you're going on personal brand wise. And he DM'd me back and he was really nice. And just again, I've like DM'd him like, congrats on the fund. I just love watching your journey, honestly, like keep smashing it. And it's just like, I think there's elements of I'm not being tactical there. I genuinely just like love what he's doing. But something could like one day I might bump into him somewhere, and it's like, I've taken the time I've not just done the post about him. Do you know what I mean? I've actually like, I commented on his thing yesterday and I've dropped him a DM. Like, I think that you can be a bit like intentional around if you want to, you know, if you genuinely, I think it has to come from a place of being genuine. I think people can tell. And you get really lazy if it's not genuine. You like comment like amazing news and it's like surface level right. Comment. Do you know what I mean? But if you genuinely are like in admiration of what people are doing, I think letting them know that and showing up and being seen is a good thing to do. But yeah, I'm of the opinion that past that, I don't really lean into like the tips and tricks and hacks and things like that. It's just good, really good organic content is what I've seen from like a decade of doing this now. Nothing rivals it. Like you can have the most, people talk about like, oh, you need your hook to be right on LinkedIn on your post and things like that. And it's like, you're focusing on the wrong thing. Like you're focusing on making the first line really good when you haven't figured out how to make your own personality the best that it can be, or you're talking about something that it doesn't make sense to me why you're talking about that thing. Like I can't connect the dots of why you've posted that from what I think you are and what I think you're trying to achieve and what you've just said. Like people will get those things wrong and they'll focus on making a great hook or, you know, the social media tips and tricks.
a great hook to bad, irrelevant content is not going to do.
Yeah.
As well. Yeah. I think it's so true what you say. I mean, when you make those genuine outreaches or connections with people that you genuinely want to connect with, you get replies like way more times than you do if you're just doing like cold DMs that don't make sense and have no personality in it. What you're really talking about is taking things back to basics, really. Like portray yourself in a way that you want to be seen and produce organic, genuine content and connect with people and be real with people. And that should just allow for growth in areas that you want to see growth. As we approach the end, I'd like to know, let's say you've nailed down your LinkedIn strategy, your personal brand is going quite well. You've mastered one or two social platforms. You discussed at the very beginning of the podcast that personal brand is above and beyond that of just social media. So where would you suggest somebody to start their journey now beyond social media once they've got a reasonable following and they're looking to further enhance that personal brand?
I think if you're in business, like speaking is an unrivaled thing. Like you just can't beat the opportunity to stand on stage in front of people, and you've got them for like a consolidated amount of time. And I've seen it so many times. Like Steve was built off the back of being a public speaker, and then everything kind of followed from there. And I think it takes a while to get the opportunity, and you've kind of got to like do a lot more work to knock on doors to open the door for yourself. But I think if it's not the online piece, the offline piece, like speaking and posting content online, if you do those two things well, business is a million times easier.
Awesome.
That's perfect. Ash, I think this is the perfect spot to leave it. So thanks for coming on. For everyone who wants to connect with you after this, where can we send them?
LinkedIn, Ash Jones.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Ash, yeah, thank you. It's been great. Cheers.
No, my pleasure.
2, 3, 4.
Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkifi Podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.